Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. To support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/the Team House.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eyes On. I'm Andy Milburn.
I'm Jason Lyons.
I'm Dimitri Kontakos.
Oh, it's amazing. We've got that absolutely down to a T, so we need to change that routine.
Yeah.
More importantly, we have coming back to us Marc P. You forgive me for referring to him as that. All of us can pronounce his name, but
I can.
But simply, he's familiar to a large number of our listeners, but we have a rapidly burgeoning, that is, growing audience. So for those of you who are not, Mark's an old friend of the Team House and we hope of us as hosts, at least for now. Former senior I was almost about to say SAS, because that's kind of the norm for the Team House, but even better, very senior guy in the agency, and Mark's very self-effacing about this, but has an unusual operational background too, for someone who started off as a case officer and rose to the agencies, among the agency's highest ranks, but perhaps more importantly is widely respected among agency guys, but also a lot of guys in the military who've worked with him, especially in SOF and especially in Afghanistan. But since leaving the military, Mark has actually given life to that rather dead expression consultant, and appears, when he appears on TV, he's actually worth watching. I for one, I get a lot of material from Mark without plagiarizing him too much. Anyway, hey, to a long lead in, Mark, great to have you. What is going on in Kursk?
Well, first of all, thanks, Andy and Jason and Dee. Thank you so much for having me. I love the show. Love coming on. It's great to do kind of a long form discussion. I'm used to these 30 or 45-second sound bites on TV. And Andy, just one thing. Kind of the secret of the business is everyone is humble. So I listen to what you all say too as well. I listen to others. There's no such thing as borrowing analysis from other commentators, because who the hell knows if we're ever right. Kursk has been let me put it this way. When I say fun, that's a horrible word to say in terms of war. But for a couple of reasons, I've certainly enjoyed this. First and foremost, there is a kind of a cast of characters in the foreign policy blob in Washington, amongst some of the think tanks. And I'm not going to name names because that's stupid, and I don't want to go down that road. But there's all this dooming always that goes on about Ukraine, that it's always the end. It's almost impossible to find anyone to say anything positive that's happening. And so this has been pretty extraordinary. This is a success. We can debate for as long as we want about why the Ukrainians did this. We actually don't know particularly, and we can talk about it, whether it's for morale boosts, whether it's for future POW swaps, whether it's for future negotiations when Ukraine actually has Russian territory. But it's a positive story. And even Washington Post this morning ran a story, or the New York Times, I can't remember. And it's always the Ukrainians are doing great, but it is impossible for kind of the analytic class following Russia to say anything good. I mean, it's almost, we still keep treating Russia as 10 feet tall militarily. It drives me nuts. But here's where it's really important. Guess what didn't happen with this? There was no fucking U.S. whining. There was no complaints. Now, in all the press reports, we heard that this took the U.S. by surprise. That's bullshit. There is an incredible intelligence soak there of human intelligence, signals intelligence, certainly imagery. And there's also, and I'll, not to get too much in trouble in this, when we work with foreign liaison we also penetrate foreign liaison. There's nothing fucking that happens in that country that we don't know about. I'm sorry. So the idea that we didn't know is bullshit. And, I think that's done for consumption.
What we always mean is we weren't told.
We weren't told. We knew, though. And guess what?
That we knew.
And Andy, guess what we didn't do? We didn't whine about it. You didn't have the chief of station or the ambassador go and do the little finger wagging to the Ukrainians, which is incredibly annoying every time they did something daring in the past. And that's the story. So the story to me is the US is okay with another country invading Russia. That's pretty fucking incredible.
Yeah.
And so, that's what I certainly tried to kind of talk about in the media. And, ultimately that is a sea change from the hand wringing. And, I mean, the NSC wakes up every morning, you're always going to get unfiltered shit from me. And I've had a couple cups of coffee, so here we go. But the National Security Council gets up every morning. The first thing they do after, taking a dump is they start worrying about escalation. That's the thing. I think they have t-shirts made. But in this case, they're not doing it. And I think that is amazing. And maybe this is becoming too optimistic, is at the end of Joe Biden's presidency, where the United States has done at the same time an extraordinary amount for Ukraine, but also withheld a lot and probably caused a lot of unnecessary deaths. But maybe we're going to allow the Ukrainians to take the gloves off. And so I think that's the story. But you know what? Interested to hear your guys' take on this too.
Well, I mean, I don't have any inside track on this. It struck me by surprise, but here's some interesting things about it. So, from my perspective, number one, I think that is so incredibly refreshing that we're not playing kind of, this frightened old woman in the kitchen wringing our hands every time. And yet at the same time starve Ukraine for ammunition. That was the ironic thing, wagging our finger and yet going through this ridiculous domestic kabuki dance which that cost lives. We all know that they cost lives, but perhaps more importantly, shut up, Siri. But perhaps more importantly, we lost some of our leverage there as far as what we were doing to the Russians via the Ukrainians, and Russians were willing to adapt. So I think this is entirely positive. The other thing, aside from the US reaction, what really surprises me is the Russian reaction, or lack thereof. Do you remember, during the counter-ISIS campaign, if we even strayed over that boundary into ISIS land, they went apeshit, right? Because they knew that it's symbolic. Well, the Russians know how important this is. Putin does. We've seen him on TV losing his mind. Yeah. And yet the response has been pathetic. And the prisoners that the Ukrainians are rounding up perhaps are an indicator of why that is. A lot of they're all conscripts, but the prisoners, guys from National Guard, internal military force. So this was an economy of force thing that the Russians, their defensive positions ground kursk. The Ukrainians knew that, took advantage of it, and it's a fait accompli now. And I think the Ukrainians have surprised themselves with their success because of the lack of counterattacks. Last thing, though, they have now probably, even with the lack of resistance, they're approaching that culminating point, and they've got to make a decision what to do.
Right. So what comes next? I mean, I don't know. That's a great question, but what is the other part of this, of course, there's a piece in the Washington Post today that, and I had heard snippets of this, maybe you have as well, is there have been behind the scenes kind of talks about future negotiations.
That was really interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so I'd heard that kind of just kind of through the grapevine, and frankly, look, if the Ukrainians want to do this, it's up. My view has always been Ukraine will settle this on when they're ready to settle this, and it should not be forced on by the United States. And so, and I guess we'll see how this goes. I mean, I don't know. I was watching, obviously following all the open source stuff yesterday, and I see they're dropping bridges. I mean, this using U.S. armaments, so this is fantastic. Let's see, and the F-16s, how much are they in play? Who knows? But I guess the other point just to make is I still don't understand why kind of this weird world that we live in, that it is impossible to actually celebrate Ukrainian successes without kind of the dooming that goes on. I mean, really, there's so much of Ukraine is doing well, but Russia is going to, rush reinforcements. Russia is going to do this, that. It's very odd. I don't know if that kind of translates, maybe your contacts in the Pentagon, but it certainly is in kind of the think tank class. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you. I think, though, perhaps it's a response to the fact that pundits went strongly the other way back in 2022, right?
Yeah.
There was this kind of euphoria and feeling that the war would end soon. I mean, it was kind of implicit, and I think that's probably kind of just a suburban Clausewitz reaction to the fact that that didn't happen. It's any balanced story's got to obviously, there's enough to be pessimistic about. It's very interesting what you said about the talks in Qatar. Yeah. Now my understanding is those talks were supposed to be exclusively focused from the Ukrainian perspective on kind of an agreement on the energy sector on both sides, like hands off infrastructure, everything from for safety concerns about nuclear plants to the fact that Ukraine's hanging on by its fingernails this last winter and is not looking forward to this next winter and wants to impose some cost on Russia in order to have a bargaining tool in Qatar. That was my impression of it, and from an official stance, Ukrainians are saying no negotiation until all Russian boots are off, even out of Crimea. But it's interesting. Yeah, that's the first negotiation. Actually, the first kind of substantive negotiation, you could say, since all the arguments about grain export.
Right. Yeah. One thing I want to raise, though, for the audience, and I think this is an important part, and this kind of applies to everybody here. I always look at these conflicts as a former practitioner, which means I wasn't at the National Security Council, I wasn't at CIA headquarters, I wasn't attending, White House meetings in the Situation Room. I always try to think about this as, okay, what if I was with my old colleagues in the field in the AO? And we'll kind of leave it as in the Ukraine AO to protect what we're doing and what we're not. But that means there's a great deal of side by sides with our Ukrainian partners, and and I think there always has been, and talking to my friends who've come back from Ukraine, I mean, there's a little bit of embarrassment's the wrong word because we've helped them tremendously, but we also have held back on aid. There is, a big domestic constituency in the United States who is kind of viscerally opposed to U.S. assistance to Ukraine. So if you're someone from SOF, from the intelligence community, and you're working side by side with the Ukrainians, there were some tough times.
Yeah.
In which, you had to do a lot of explaining, why, for example, if you're next to someone from, Ukrainian military intelligence whose family is hiding in a shelter, maybe, family members have been killed, why the U.S. is not doing enough. So for the first time, what I was thinking about the other day was, hey, if you're a U.S. practitioner on the ground, this is a time where, you're looking at your Ukrainian colleague across the table or sitting next to you, having a beverage. And you can have some pride in that the U.S. is actually kind of doing the right thing, and we're letting the Ukrainians take the gloves off a little bit. It always kind of runs through my mind because, the one thing we do to our detriment is we fall in love with our partners. I did that with the Kurds. I did that with Syrians. I did that certainly with the Afghans.
But it's an American thing. I think
it's an American thing, and we also then we end up.
But it's something we should be proud of too.
Yeah.
I mean.
So I thought that's an interesting, just kind of, I'm sure some of our old colleagues are feeling pretty good that they can kind of sit with a lot of pride next to the Ukrainians in these days.
It's an anomaly. We've spoken about this before on the program, Mark, and is that, in our former professions, military or the intelligence agency, people tend to be right of center, right? Especially in the United States,
right.
Less so in European militaries where you see more of a kind of an equal distribution. But certainly in the military, we tend to be, pretty conservative, small, big C. And yet we've got this anomaly where you have a conservative element within the United States opposing aid to Ukraine for reasons that defy me. Here's a chance to break down an enemy, a long-standing enemy, whether it's communist or now an autocratic state. It's an enemy of the United States, breaking and reducing their ability to exert power on their neighbors is absolutely in our national interest. And if we can do that at cost, only financial cost, and not a single drop of NATO blood, why the hell wouldn't we do that? That is what blows me out of the water. And my colleagues, regardless of how they vote, or none of them can explain why that is the case, why we would refuse to support Ukraine. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, at a cost of money? Come on, it's like we're the richest nation on earth. We've all seen money thrown away on ridiculous stuff in Afghanistan and Iraq. At last, there's a chance to see our buck actually buy something in terms of I hate to say it, but the blood of our enemy.
Right.
Without cost to ourselves. Without cost to ourselves. But that is too expensive. Never mind 20 years of war where we, our own blood and treasure for no gain at all.
Could not have said it better. I agree 1,000%, and I've had huge arguments. I mean, there's, I was talking to a friend of mine. He's was a former Air Force, still in the reserves. He said, kind of on the Air Force blogs, there's this kind of virulent anti-Ukraine streak too. I just don't understand it.
Well, I mean, I think one thing we can explain there is it's an Air Force blog. I mean, it's a different type of cat. I mean, it's super bright, but they are. When we talk in former military, I don't necessarily include the Air Force in that. I mean, they're a wild card, right?
Yeah. In my conversations, when it's come up, it's always been implied and sometimes outright said that it's because they are in office. We know who they is, the other side. But if it was their side that was in office, they'd be all for it. So that's what I'm getting. I'm not saying that that's the majority and that's the whole reason, but that's, what I'm hearing, that they
we miss the old national security Republicans. I mean, that's just a fact. I don't know what's happened.
Yeah,
exactly.
Now you did have Lindsey Graham, who is, the other day kind of screaming for, former F-16 pilots to come volunteer to go to Ukraine, which I thought was, first of all, pretty funny. Nothing wrong with that.
That's a bolt from the blue.
I mean, it was out of nowhere. It's okay.
He's the same guy who's demanding that Zelensky comes and visits him in his office to explain.
Right.
These guys, there's no consistency. It's based on their perception of constituent bias, right, or emotion.
I mean, Lindsey Graham is relatively hawkish, though. He was talking about preemptive strike in Iran from.
Sure.
He's pretty out there.
It's good. I mean, there are plenty of national security Republicans, the kind of old school ones, and some of them, are. Run powerful committees in Congress. You have all the Mikes. Who is it? Mike Turner, McCall, others. But it's just the Republican Party changed. I mean, I'm sorry that the presidential candidate for the Republicans hates Ukraine and doesn't want to spend a penny on this. Yeah. And so I think that's a problem. And I don't think I'm making a political statement. When
what's even worse is when they drag up a guy who's and we avoid political, but a PAO enlisted Marine, and then quote him as though he's the, we're talking about JD Vance. I mean, I have no opinion of him, other than that. But let's put this in context. He was an enlisted PAO, right? He was
for 6 months in Iraq.
Yeah, in Iraq. I mean, that doesn't make him an expert on national security, but his comments have been taken as though they came from the Delphi Oracle.
Yeah,
it's absurd. Anyway, back to
you digressed into politics. Exactly what we didn't want to do.
Anyway, no, I mean, back to Ukraine. So what next, Mark? What do you think is going to happen?
So I think that the kind of the key points on this obviously are November, the presidential election in the United States, and I so much rides on that. At the same time, though, just having been I was in Greece for a couple of weeks. I was stopped in the UK. I mean, there is a feeling that the Europeans have stepped up, and if you just look at numbers in terms of European assistance to Ukraine, it's pretty amazing. Again, charges that the U.S. has bankrolled everything is bullshit. Ukraine has put up a huge amount of resources, and you have countries, in kind of in Central Europe or maybe not the old Europe, not Germany or France or the UK, but you have countries like Poland in frontline states that are really hawkish, that understand the Russian threat. So I think that Europe, just in general, is in a much better position on this. And one other note there, and perhaps, and I think I'm right on this, is that there's not political divides between left and right. For example, in the UK, change in government policy on Ukraine's the same.
Both support Ukraine. Yeah.
And I think that's important. Germany is having some issues now, but when I've talked to my contacts in Germany, because there's been a kind of a halt on German assistance. This is they're running around. So this has to do with a budget issue, rather than actual kind of lack of German resolve. And so ultimately, I think that Europe is in a much better position too. And again, for this to kind of be a sustained fight, that's going to have to be the case. It will be, if the Republicans win in the presidency in November of the United States, U.S. is going to take a much different role, obviously, with Ukraine, and that's of some concern. But in talking to kind of senior European officials when I was there, as I'm sipping my ouzo on the Greek islands, I still had some contact with folks. They know what they have to do. And so I'm not as pessimistic about the future. And the last point too is, look, I'm certainly not a military analyst, but I do think that obviously the ATACMS arrived. This is an issue we talked about for months and months, and they've been put to good use. The F-16s are now flying over the skies, and I do think U.S. kit matters. And so we'll see, what the Ukrainians can do finally if they're outfitted correctly. Still a huge manpower issue. I mean, you guys know this even more than I do from time there. What are they going to do about conscription? Russia does have a numerical advantage of people, but the Ukrainians have surprised us time and again, and so we'll see. I am not pessimistic. But I do think you're kind of right in the sense that we shouldn't kind of, fall completely in the camp of Ukraine's about to win now, just because they've had some success over the last, 9-10 days.
Yeah, certainly. If you look at a map, DR, I found one that I'll send you. You can post however you wish, but it's really interesting as far as the decisions now in the Ukrainian general's hands. Or Zelensky's hands, do they hold, the immediate concern, do they hold that territory? I mean, I think, regardless of all the reasons to do this, and I think it's hard to argue against the fact that it was inspired, but at the same time now had to take advantage of it. And the problem is with holding that terrain is defending it, especially with air defense, is going to be a real issue because Ukraine's. So now it's extended its lines. There's already this kind of internal struggle between prioritizing air defense, whether on the front line or infrastructure. And so in a sense, now extending this makes that worse. So holding in place may not be what they can do, but certainly, and it would seem a shame to withdraw back to their lines and make this kind of a raid and a blow.
Right.
So I think probably somewhere in between is what
right. I agree.
Pull back to a more defendable position. But the key thing that you kind of pointed out is that it's still kind of in a dire position in Donbass. I mean, the Russians are within 15 kilometers of Pokrovsk,
right?
Which is, along with Kramatorsk, the two major cities left in Donbass.
And one thing to raise, this is actually something that I thought was quite remarkable. A incredible Wall Street Journal piece on Nord Stream 2.
Yes, I saw that.
So essentially, the Ukrainians fucking did it. And so this is something that, of course,
tell the story. This is a great one.
But so, I mean, I've known about this for a long time from kind of all sorts of media contacts who this kind of percolated about. But so here's the thing: at the end of the day, nobody gives a shit. And that's incredible.
Can you talk about very briefly what happened? Or
sure. So this was again. I don't have anything in front of me here, but this is what are we? It's a year and a half ago. It's quite some.
Yeah, it was not. Yeah, exactly. It's 2022, wasn't it? Mid 2022.
So the pipeline mysteriously explodes, and everyone thought the Russians had done it. I remember
September 26, 22.
I remember going on the media saying that as well. So I was obviously wrong. And at some point, someone kind of called me and said, "Hey, you might want to stop saying that."
Now, this is just for this is the pipeline. Can you just talk a little bit about the background, what the pipeline does, and
Go ahead. You're gonna do this better than me. I'll botch this.
Yeah. So the pipeline we're talking about, the Nord Stream pipeline, takes I think it's again, I'm probably going to screw it up, but it's liquid. It's I think it's LNG.
It's LNG, right? Yeah.
From Russia to to Germany, right? And
natural gas pipeline from Russia to Germany.
Yeah, so I got it right. And it was a source of contention in the months leading up to the war, because it put Germany in the the way that the United States and UK looked at it. Certainly within NATO, it made Germany kind of a supplicant of Russia.
Right.
So it gave Russia great leverage over Germany, and it did look as though Germany was kind of politically voting, with that knowledge in mind. That was the concern, right?
Because of the economy, they were very worried about economic effects if they shut off kind of that, the input of gas, which they were not incorrect to have that to have that concern. But kind of many of us thought that the Russians were kind of behind this, some kind of covert action. But it turns out, just again for the listeners, the Ukrainians, looks like, with kind of this bizarre operation that had some kind of private involvement of former Ukrainian, special operations divers, known to the Ukrainian military. Zelensky turned it off because the agency found out about it. I mean, this is the story in the Wall Street Journal, so I'm not confirming or denying anything. But ultimately, the Ukrainians did it. And if this had come out a year and a half ago, it would have been a huge mess politically in Germany. But right now, nobody seems to care, because everyone has kind of made that decision to support Ukraine. So again, the big picture on this, it's a spy story. It's a movie. Someone's got to write a movie on this. The real story is that nobody seems to really kind of bat an eye on this. And that, to me, shows the evolution of thinking in Europe. And there are certainly some of those, and I tend to agree with this, is that, of course, the German government has known this forever, and they kind of stuck it in these law enforcement, legal channels. So it would take a long time to be investigated and to come out. So again, having made that political decision to support Ukraine, which might have been harder, if in effect, and I mean, this, you could also make the argument this was an attack by Ukraine on a NATO country. I mean, it's pretty funny.
Yeah. Do you think, probably what has helped play in Ukraine's favor here is the fact that there have been, since then, Russian sabotage attempts in Germany, right? Involving full nationals.
Yeah. There's been Germans who have been arrested for espionage. I mean, there's been this amazing exposés of Russian intelligence malfeasance in Germany too, right? So there's certainly a much more growing anti-Russian sentiment. When I talk to some German journalists on this, they're very clear on that. But again, this is one of those. This must frustrate the Russians to no end. I mean, they know they didn't do it. Yeah. They were blamed for it. They know who did it. Yeah. And there was no political repercussions for this, and so in some ways, it's going to make a hell of a movie. But I don't think it's going to have any kind of effect. I mean, other people, might disagree.
It's already old news.
It's old news.
Yeah,
it's a great, and some of these, I remember, I think it was someone from the Washington Post who called me originally and said, do you think the Russians did it? And I said, yeah. They were reminding me now how wrong I was. So, hey, sometimes.
Yeah.
Mark, I got a question. We definitely helped, right? Let's be honest. You don't have to confirm it. You don't
not
have
at
to...
all.
Okay.
No. Nope.
All right. Sure.
No, because D, here's the thing. This is a time where, we couldn't give a Hello Kitty bag to the Ukrainians without there being heart palpitations at the NSC. You're talking about, our MRE is going to cause World War III. So the idea that we helped them do this is ludicrous. I mean, really, we just did not.
The polls?
I mean, I would read the Wall Street Journal piece. Pretty good.
Okay.
This was the time when, in the Mozart group, I received a very formal letter from the State Department explaining how I was not breaking ITAR regulations by training Ukrainian soldiers. Okay, those of you who know about ITAR regulations know that's, it just doesn't make sense when you're teaching
first aid.
Yeah, when you're teaching first aid or
Yeah.
how to break down an AK-47, ITAR has nothing to do with it. But someone, this was all the part of, hey, wait a second, this is scary. These guys are Americans in Ukraine doing these things. They must be violating something. So
Right.
they look for ITAR,
Andy, explain what ITAR is real quick.
Shit, I can't. I mean, it's a law that governs the exchange of technical deadly
Yeah,
information.
international traffic and arms regulations.
Yeah. Okay. So teaching guys how to put on a pressure bandage is not or even teaching them how to shoot a weapon is not governed by ITAR. But yeah, and most everyone in the State Department knows that. But the fact that we received this letter, and then it became that's what the Intercept got hold of, and it became hey, look, there they are in Ukraine. But
Doing this kind of stuff, right.
in retrospect, ITAR regulations, really? Is that what you were worried about? I mean,
Right.
no, of course no one was worried about that. They were worried about escalation. They were worried about the perception of Americans being seen in Ukraine on the Ukrainian side, and so they were trying to me
throw, Andy, one more quick thing here, just because again, I'm going to be I'm going to be an Atlanticist here. I'm very kind of pleased at how the Europeans have reacted over the last several months. French President Macron comes out and says, "Fuck it, let's put military advisors in Ukraine."
Yeah,
and so like just that evolution.
And the Brits have special operations, special forces.
Well, that's the story that hasn't been told on that is the British special operations community and what they've done inside.
Yeah.
And which is
Tell us.
Our old soft colleagues, who are training Ukrainians in Germany are kind of salivating at what the Brits are able to do. But again, putting this all together, so the incredible kind of British cost versus benefit calculus. There is no risk aversion on the British government.
They integrate shells of Storm Shadow missiles.
Right.
Every single piece of the breaching equipment they had, they gave to the Ukrainians.
So it's amazing. So I mean, so Europe has stepped up, and I think that's a really good story.
Missiles, yeah.
Because of uncertainty about the U.S. in November.
So Mark, big picture question for you. I saw that 1 October that there's going to be a new Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, Rutte. He's a Dutch Prime Minister. Do you know anything about him?
I mean, tremendous ally of the United States. The Dutch is essentially a Five Eyes partner. And the Five Eyes, D, you're going to jump in and say that. What are the Five Eyes? So in essence, is a historic intelligence sharing relationship between the U.S., the U.K., Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And the Dutch deserve to be in there as well, because just their security partnerships that the United States has with the Dutch. So the idea of we're going to have some certainly continuity in NATO.
Awesome.
But I think this is a very positive development. Dutch are tremendous allies. This should continue. And these things, Jason, I mean, the elections for Secretary General of NATO is all very kind of political and done behind the scenes, but never done without the complete push and support of the United States.
Yes.
So awesome. I think we're in good shape.
Cool.
Mark, one thing when you talk about Europe kind of picking up the burden for supporting Ukraine or the responsibility to lead, I think that's it's really interesting what has emerged from kind of the US's step back from global leadership over Ukraine, right? One is that Europe has stepped forward. A couple of things, Poland is now absolutely a leading nation within Ukraine, and this is not something we could have imagined 2 decades ago. 4% committed to 4% of GDP on defense, and you're tracking all the other things they're doing. I mean, they are and the Baltic nations, as you know, and Estonia has done that study on ammunition. Worst case scenario, if the US can no longer provide specifically 155 shells, when is it that Europe can pick up that slack? And it's actually as early as 2025,
right?
Late 2025. So they, if European manufacturing goes to surge capacity in order to do that. But the point is that these countries are thinking about that, not just thinking about it, they're on a path to doing that to kind of proof Ukraine from effects of the US elections.
And again, it's
which is embarrassing.
It is embarrassing, yeah. But and for for the most part, this goes across the political spectrum in most European countries that really matter. So it doesn't matter, it's not going to have as much of an effect. One, you mentioned Estonia. I mean, it's such an interesting example because this is it's an extraordinary certainly frontline state, but their intelligence service is world class. And CIA officers who have experience in that region, every year the Estonians come out and they do a classified or a releasable to liaison, but also an unclassified report on Russia. And it's one of the most kind of sought after open source pieces. They are really good. And if you take a look and do kind of a whole bunch of digging, there's been some tremendous Estonian intelligence successes as well. So again, countries that you wouldn't figure would have that kind of resolve, but are more hawkish than any on Russia, and that's also for good reason. But ultimately, I think the conclusion is that Europe is in much better shape, and I agree with you. It was always to get to 2025, which is, by the way, what the U.S. supplemental package of $60 billion was really designed to
bridge that gap.
Yep, it's a bridging. And by the way, politically in the United States, that's smart. Because we're not going to say this is a forever war, and then we're not going to say we're going to throw tens of $billions every year. What in fact, I think the administration was smart in saying this package is going to get us to 2025, and then European contributions really start kicking in as well. And I think that's a good strategy.
Yeah. So I mean, we probably feel a little bit ambivalent about it. But at this, I mean, it's about the fact that people feel they cannot rely on the United States.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah.
But at the same time, this has been something that since the end of the Cold War, that the U.S. has been kind of mumbling and moaning about, and increasingly was participation in NATO. I never understood that, to be honest with you, because NATO, the only time NATO has ever reacted to an Article 5 was on behalf of the United States. The United States has gained way more from NATO. Those of us who've served with, I'm a Marine, so I wasn't closely involved in NATO during my service, but I can recognize that the United States, have benefited far more equally from NATO as NATO has from us.
You're right. It's not, first of all, it shouldn't be transactional. It's not. I mean, there's, but the fact of the matter is over 1,000 NATO troops were killed in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And so, and they stepped up. And I think that's, again, when you start talking about, the benefits of NATO, you're 100% right, because when Article 5 was invoked, NATO partners came through. And again, there's the, other side of the political aisle, or a side of the political aisle in the United States that doesn't seem to understand that. The idea that somehow, Europe is freeloading off of us is just utterly ridiculous.
I've never bought that argument, ever.
Yeah. Well, 40% of Americans.
But all this may be irrelevant if the Middle East erupts in war, as it has threatened to do every day in the last 60 years. But what are your thoughts now about your thoughts about Iran? Hey, before we go to that, I just one last kind of semi-comical point to this thing about escalation.
Sure.
I just saw as we're here that the administration has said that they're okay, that this is an acceptable use of American weaponry, including driving Stryker armored vehicles in Russia. I mean, so it's
right.
It up. Drone strikes are not good, but you can drive a Stryker.
I feel bad for the DoD press. There was the press spokesman the other day. She was, her brief was horrendous.
They're out of depth.
She's terrible, dude.
Yeah.
Right, so I feel bad for them because,
we use the word, but we deliberately choose PAOs who are geeky and out to lunch, because that way people feel sorry for them.
Well, okay, so maybe I'm falling into that trap.
It's not like as though we know they're not going to wow journalists with their authority, and so we put these guys who are like hanging out there on the edge of being in the military, just ultimate PAO weenies, so they can and you can see journalists actually feel sorry for them, you know.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work on this, because how do you explain the difference between in terms of aggression between driving an armored vehicle across someone's border or simply flying a drone over that same border? Most people would think the striker is a little more of a violation of national sovereignty, but no, we've figured out that it is not. But someone's going to use that against us. Watch, someone will use this against us.
They already have been. You've seen some of the, like, a little bit on Twitter and stuff.
I'm not arguing with it. I think we should just say, hey, fuck it, we're all in, man.
Right. That's it.
Trip feeding weapons. We're either supporting you or we're not. If we're supporting you, never hate you. All boundaries are off, man. Moscow, fuck, man. Of course it's. And what are you going to do about it? You know.
And let me just make one point, Andy. I think that is missed in this too. So, you know, we feel comfortable with these strange nuances and the verbal kind of word salad. I don't even understand what the fuck they're saying. You know, what's okay, what's not. The Russians think we're doing everything.
Hey, they think they're at war with us.
Yes. So who are we making ourselves feel better? Yeah. Right.
I mean, so bring it. I mean, absolutely bring it on. You know, I mean, we don't have. I'm just saying, one or two storm shadows in the center, or I mean, you know, attackums in the center of a Russian city. Oh God, I'm going to be criticized for this. Okay, used judiciously to send a strategic message, right? It will save countless lives on the battlefield. Could save. You know, I mean, we just don't.
Right.
And yeah, exactly. If we're reading what the Russians already had been saying about us since the outset of the war, they're at war with us.
Yep.
That's they're telling themselves out and out.
All right, on to the Middle East.
Yeah. Can you solve the problems in less than 15 minutes?
We'll give you 30. We'll give you 30.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I've had a couple cups of coffee, and plus, like I actually have to get on with I've had this permanent vacation status in the Greek islands and in the UK and then in Maine. So I got it. This is good. I'm doing something serious now. No, so the Middle East stuff is super interesting to me. That was the majority of my career was obviously based in the Middle East. I think I've told you all before, you know, I work very closely with the Israeli intelligence services, with the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Palestinians. I've been everywhere. I've, you know, traveled. And so I have a lot of experience in this region. I guess first and foremost, let's kind of tackle the biggest issue of the day. We'll leave the talks, ceasefire talks, for a second, but you know, where is this Iranian retaliation? And so a couple things I think occurred is that one is that and first of all, the charge that somehow, you know, the Biden administration is not supportive of Israel is fucking ludicrous. It's the most pro-Israel White House in the history of the United States-Israeli relationship. And so we deployed this incredibly.
Arguably, it led to ending his career, right? Arguably.
Well, right. Yes.
That was
a whole separate issue, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, this kind of military package, which is now in the region, whether it's, you know, one carrier battle group, another one en route, you have a U.S. nuclear submarine, you have F-22s, you have F-35s now. Of course, on the carriers, but also F-22 deployments. I think they're in Jordan, but who knows? They're being kind of secretive on where they park them. But ultimately, and messages sent to the Iranians very strongly, both directly and indirectly. We have a channel with the Swiss, but basically telling the Iranians, you know, be very careful on what you do. And I think that's worked. And so the threat of military force has actually really worked here and deterred the Iranians. And again, I think this is the resolve of the United States. It's certainly the resolve of the Israelis. They're in no mood to kind of absorb another mass casualty event. And one thing, you know, what's interesting about Israel is that whether there's huge debate on what, you know, Netanyahu's hated, given. There's a majority who want a ceasefire deal given. When it comes to Hezbollah, you know, 60,000 Israelis can't go back to their homes in the north. School starting in Israel soon. You know, politically, this is not an issue on how to deal with Hezbollah that is all that controversial. And so I think there's been a lot of strong Israeli resolve too. And so the Iranians seem to have blinked. And I think that's a good thing. I, for one, have never been afraid of a confrontation with Iran because we've allowed the Iranians to kill Americans for too long. And the only way to deal with them is shows of strength and force. So for now, and again, this is obviously dynamic, but for now, I think the situation is stabilized. It's day to day, but clearly, you know, we're picking up on I would imagine on imagery, the Iranian missile units and Hezbollah units standing down. A lot of this is going to be intelligence driven. The other point of this, I think as well is on the ceasefire talks. The U.S. I think, is doing the right thing in pushing for this. But you have to have two sides that want to come to an agreement. I think the Israelis, Netanyahu is coming around a bit. He's been under enormous pressure from the Israeli national security apparatus, from Mossad and Shin Bet and Israeli defense intelligence, in the sense of, look, the deal that the U.S. put forward, which was an Israeli deal as well, is actually pretty good. We can deal with this. And if you want to go in the nuances, it has to do with what's called the Philadelphia Corridor. Philadelphia Corridor is the Egyptian-Gaza border. Who patrols it? The Israelis are there now. It would be better for them to stay. Hamas is refusing this, and basically, Israeli officials are saying we could probably deal with it if we pulled out a little bit. And so, there's all this back and forth. But to me, the key question is, and one other point on that too, is kind of the conventional wisdom is that Netanyahu is never going to make a deal because his government's going to fall, but it's not, because the Knesset's not in session. That's the Israeli parliament. They actually go on a 3-month recess. If you think that's fucking crazy what the United States does during a war. And so he is actually in no danger of falling until they come back in October. So he could cut a deal. So I guess the key question for me is more on the Hamas side. And everybody is always hammering. I think Netanyahu's an asshole, but everyone's hammering Bibi for being the party that refuses to make a deal. But I think there is question now is what is Yahya Sinwar going to do? Last point on this, and again, I always try to look at this from, I know, you guys have spent time in Israel. I look at it from the Israeli perspective. I'm not condoning their behavior, not condemning it, but the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, first of all, a fucking glorious operation from the intelligence perspective. To put someone on the X like that in a denied area is pretty impressive. But Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he was given the opportunity to do this by Mossad and by the Israeli Defense Forces, there's a question of should he have done this that would have affected the talks. My argument is he had to do it. If that had leaked, that the architect, the leader of the group that killed 1,200 Israelis was on the X and he didn't give the go ahead, he's in more trouble politically than he would be in any other situation. And for fuck's sake, like, are you kidding me? Like, we would have done the same thing. So I'm kind of all over the place on all these, but I think I'm all over the place because it's tough. There's a dynamic situation, lots of different variables. And so, next week they go back to Doha and we'll see what happens on the talks.
It enabled the method. It was a well-designed operation in a number of ways, but not least of which is it gave Iran a kind of a face-saving way out, that the US was able to say, hey, look, this was a foreigner, yes, but it was a foreigner who was involved in these things on your territory who was
and
killed.
The Israelis don't brag about it either.
Yeah, no Iranians were killed. Let's call it a buy and let's move on.
Right. Look, the Israelis said we're going to track down all these motherfuckers and kill them all. Yeah. They're going to do that. These are dead men walking. So no surprise. I think it embarrassed the Iranians for sure. One point I want to make on kind of the other assassination. It was like 12 hours of insane Israeli intelligence and special operations capabilities, and that's when the Israelis killed Fuad Shukr in Beirut. Fuad Shukr was in essence one of the top leaders of Hezbollah. People were calling him the chief of staff to Nasrallah. For us, why does that matter? And Andy, for you in particular, why does that matter?
And Jason.
Sorry, that's right, both of you guys. 2
Marines, there's 2 Greeks.
I would say, Jason, I apologize for both of you. And it should be personal. Fuad Shukr was responsible for the deaths of 241 U.S. Marines in 1983 at the U.S. Marine Corps barracks. There's a book. Jack Carr just put out a book, or he sent me an advanced copy of a book he wrote on this, on what was one of the deadliest terrorist attacks, and really almost the beginning of kind of the U.S. war on terrorism. And so, no one should shed a tear that this senior Hezbollah member was killed. And so, as I kind of, I'm not always popular when I say this, when I kind of go on MSNBC and say this, but I basically said, look, every former and current U.S. Marine should, find their closest Israeli friend and buy him a beer. They did us a solid on this. And also, Fletch Shuker had $5 million rewards for justice program reward on his head too. So the one thing we seem to forget in the U.S. media is that we should not be neutral. Hamas is a terrorist organization, as is Hezbollah. Now, the U.S. has to play this kind of mediating role in trying to tamp down, the prospect for a regional war. But this is not, the U.S. just being a neutral party.
It's not mediating between two sovereign states.
It's not mediating, exactly.
That is, of course, the danger.
Prior to Al Qaeda, Hezbollah killed more Americans than any other terrorist group, and on October 7th, over 30 Americans were killed by Hamas. And by the way, an American citizen with two passports, a U.S. and Israeli passport, we consider in the counterterrorism community to be an American citizen. I don't care what other passport you have. The U.S. government does not care. The FBI, who is the lead in investigating these things, doesn't care. They're Americans, and so somehow we tend to forget it. In my background, there's a term we always use, which is bird in hand. If you got a terrorist on the X, you take them out. And the one thing that I always saw too in working with the Israelis is they're really smart on benefit cost calculus. So they don't go in there and take a shot at Fouad Shukr or Ismail Haniyeh and say, hey, this is going to be cost free. They might say, hey, we might lose an embassy somewhere, or our assessment is the Iranians will retaliate, but in a kind of a mild fashion. But they do this with eyes wide open, and right now it looks like their calculus was correct.
I mean, yeah, when you know that you're going to have a U.S. carrier group and a nuclear submarine steaming in, of course that's going to be in your calculus. Right. You're going to have backup.
So ultimately, that kind of that bird in hand notion, which we used in the counterterrorism community in the United States, whether it's drone strikes in Pakistan or in Yemen or other places, if you got a real bad guy, especially a high value target on the X. I can't think of a time, forget the whole issue with whether we had bin Laden, years ago, but I can't figure a time where we had someone of that seniority and we didn't take a shot. In fact, if you look at Leon Panetta's autobiography, he talks about when we killed his, I think it was AQ number 2 or 3, and we killed his family as well, and we did so knowingly. There are costs to this, but you got to take the shot. I'm glad the Israelis did.
Mark, before we wind up here and we've got an opportunity to talk, what's on your mind that we haven't already talked about? Even if it's just fresh memories of your holiday in Greece.
No, I think so that's a great question, because sometimes it's good to go on vacation and kind of reflect on stuff and career and things like that. And what I was thinking about are two things. One is what we talked about earlier, is this is a good time to be with our Ukrainian partners. I miss that. I would love to be at a time like this, working with the Ukrainians, especially when they're kind of planning some of these pretty daring operations. And the other is just on the Middle East. What I think about a lot is, and I think I'm disappointed. What's on my mind is I'm disappointed in national security media. Let me give credit to one journalist, Shane Harris, of the Washington Post, is an excellent reporter. He covers the intelligence beat. He has for years. And I remember talking to him a couple months ago, and I was like, you got to go to Israel. Like, so many of the national security media here, their sources they talk to via Signal. So they'll signal their contacts at the NSC, but they don't go to the region. They don't go, whether it's Ukraine, but so Shane went off to Israel, and I gave him some suggestions on who to talk to, and he had great contacts too. And he came back with kind of a different, more nuanced view of, because the conflict in Israel is, yes, Netanyahu's an asshole. Yes, we want him out. But the Israelis are traumatized from October 7th. And if you don't really understand that, you don't understand their response. Even such things as, there's been horrible civilian casualties in Gaza. There's no dispute on that. And what I'm going to say now, again, I don't want people to get upset, but the Israelis don't fucking care. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand that. Now, I'm not saying that's right. In Israel, there's a lack of press coverage of civilian casualties inside. That's not a good thing. But if you want to understand,
you can't see it on TV. You cannot.
You've been there, Andy. So it's just not covered. Now, is that wrong? Well, I mean, I think but the Israelis are so traumatized from October 7th that you have to understand their thinking now in everything. You know, my old contacts in Mossad and the Israeli Foreign Ministry for years were absolutely supportive of a two-state solution. They're not anymore. They said they're not ready. Now, the U.S. policy is to push for this. I believe in my soul that's the right thing to do. I spent a ton of time in the Palestinian areas. I think I've been to every city in the West Bank. I work with Palestinian intelligence. And I think the Israeli practices in the West Bank are abhorrent. But that's not where Israel is right now. So it's just the idea of that I think the national security media, doesn't do enough kind of field reporting. You have to go to these areas, and it goes back to my time at CIA. You know, one of the things that we did is that when senior officers would come back from the field, often they'd go down and see the president. And so we take, chief of stations from all across, the land, and because the president wants to hear from the guy or the girl on the ground, not from the analysts, not from the policymakers, but from someone who has actually, been on the ground in a certain area. And that to me is invaluable. And I think that I wish the national security media would do the same. So I've been pondering that recently when I of course obsessively follow everything, whether I read the Journal, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post. I will painfully watch Fox News sometimes. Sorry, that's my I have to do that, as well as CNN and MSNBC. But nobody really does the hard work. I mean, get out there and go to regions and talk to people. That's how you're really going to understand things.
That's a really good point, I think. And you see that in Israel, but you saw it in Ukraine to an extent too. The journalists who went beyond Kiev, there were very few, because they thought that they could get the story via WhatsApp or Signal, right. Local. Yep. I think, at the same time, there are a handful. Wall Street Journal's has a coterie of them, and New York Times, to be fair, and of journalists who really, guys like Eric Schmidt with the New York Times, who really do root out the story. And but I think that's a really fair point, in your comments from my part are absolutely accurate.
And so I guess,
sorry, go ahead, Mark.
And I think kind of the last piece is I would love, I don't even know if there's going to be a debate. But if I guess there's one scheduled for early September. And I know Americans don't vote on foreign policy, but I would love to see foreign policy covered in the debate between Harris and Trump if it happens, because I think again, that's my world.
Yeah.
And I think that there could be some profound differences that should be kind of discussed.
I would be really interested in kind of to see a comparative poll of how many, maybe compared to 2 decades and then 4 decades ago, how many Americans really are interested in foreign policy. Because when we do get to foreign policy and debates, the level of debate drops to kind of middle school level. Right. It's them bad, us good. It's a very and for the most part, candidates don't have a good understanding of debates. It makes me laugh when we see candidates who, not laugh, that's not fair. I'm glad to see candidates who are veterans, but it does make me laugh when there's an assumption that because someone's a veteran, they must know about foreign policy, right? Because they've been on the pointy end of it. But let
me add one quick thing for the listeners, and I think this is an inspirational thing. When you serve overseas for the United States government, oftentimes you're working at a U.S. embassy. And I always believed, I remember walking down the street when I was serving in Damascus, and at a time where the U.S. we don't have an embassy there anymore, but U.S.-Syrian relationship was in the toilet, and I would walk down at night and I'd see the American flag there, and it was flying, silhouetted. It's dark at night, but the lights on the flag, and it meant something to me, but it also meant something to ordinary Syrians, and here's my point: at every U.S. embassy, there is a line outside the consular section that sometimes runs around the corner. And that's because America is still seen as the bright, shining city on the hill, and in terms of economic liberalism, political, and this is not liberal versus conservative. This is economic freedoms, political freedoms, what we stand for. That's really important for this to continue, that America has to be seen in that light. And so, to me, that was one of the inspiring things about serving overseas, is that America stood for something. That is what we have done in Ukraine. And I guess my worry is I wonder if that will continue with kind of our political divisions. That's something that concerns me.
Yeah, great points to ponder, Mark. We need to have you on again before this last long break.
Anytime.
Love
coming on
the show. Yeah, you're one of our you're one of our close friends. I don't know how you feel about that, but
I come on, I love it. I need some bling though. Are you guys doing any like t-shirts or mugs or anything like that?
D.
Yeah, you got to send me some stuff.
I'll get it done. 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
I've lost a little weight now. I dropped 20 pounds, thank God.
Nice.
Fat, so.
We were having problems silk screening Dee's image on the back of our switch.
I will walk around with Dee's image on a t-shirt anytime.
Don't say that because I will send it to you. I will send you a t-shirt. Mark, where can they find you?
So fortunately or unfortunately, I'm on Twitter at @mpolymer. I tweet mostly, as Dee knows, about the Red Sox, but a lot of stuff about politics, a lot of stuff mostly about foreign policy. One of the things that I did was, and it's hurt me, but my kind of as an old national security centrist, my political views are pretty well known, and so people get pissed at me sometimes about that. But I'm on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn, which I think has gone kind of crazy. There's a lot of weird shit on LinkedIn now.
Yeah.
People doing stuff. And
what do you mean there's weird shit on LinkedIn? I haven't noticed that.
It's gotten too political. I mean, it's to me, people are putting on LinkedIn what they used to put on Twitter, and I don't like that. LinkedIn was a freaking business thing in the past. So
or at least a place for adults to discuss things.
Right. Let's see. I'm on MSNBC all the time. I'm on a couple times a week. So if they have me on at 5 a.m. these days and so that's early. But it's good. I get up early. I'm an early riser. I come back. I get the rest of my day, and so yeah. So it's I've been busy enough, and got to make it up to New York City again sometime soon. I just was up there. This is we talked about this before the show. I took my son to see Slipknot a couple days ago. I'm still at 55 years old. I'm still a crazy heavy metal fan, and so Dee was trying to get me to come into studio, but I said no. I think we're going to be out too late and banging our heads against the wall.
Also, you have your podcast too, Above Average Intelligence.
I have a podcast, Above Average Intelligence. That's
you're going to bring over soon to the Team House Network.
Yeah, don't say that. And that's been fun. It's it's a kind of a different format. It's a quick 30-40 minutes where I just can chat about stuff. But I make fun of myself on that as well, because usually we kind of devolve into my drinking habits at the Vienna Inn or my love of heavy metal and the Red Sox, and so a little bit of national security here and there. But it's
you have some great guests on it too. It's a great podcast.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to feed them to you guys as well. So
you should have Andy Milburn or Jason Lyons on it.
I would love to.
Or Jack Murphy or Sean Naylor.
Now you put them on the spot.
See how this works, guys? You see how this works?
It's good. It's fun doing that.
People helping people.
Yeah. No, these and it's fun just having a chat with kind of old friends. So I like that. And the other thing too is, I mean, Dee, you're good on the metrics. I have no fucking idea how many people listen to these things.
They don't tell you?
I sort of pay attention, and I don't know. I mean, the one thing, and for everyone here on this show understands this, when you get into this kind of space, you got to have thick skin. There are, and it's been hard because you kind of put your whole life out there.
Yeah.
If you want to kind of jump into the arena, there's going to be, flip a coin. 50% of the people are going to think you're an asshole. And one of the things, a good buddy of mine is Dan Hoffman, former CIA station chief in Moscow. He's the Fox News intel correspondent, national security analyst. And he always tells me, he's like, man, I wish I could do what you do, because you just say whatever the fuck's on your mind. But there's a price to pay for that. And so some people don't like it, but it's if you jump in the arena, this is what you get.
Which is why I am not on Twitter, because I will fight. Which is why I'm not on Twitter, because I will fight everyone.
Oh God! I was called. You guys will love this. Someone said you're an Islamist communist.
Nice.
They called me that the other day, and I was like, I said that's awesome. I actually wrote back. I was like, that is a good one. I don't know what that means, but I'm going to use that.
I've got used to. I mean, I don't mind the insults like that. What still bugs me, and I've got to stop it, are accusations of lying. Yeah. So I don't mind people calling me an asshole or anything, but I'll give you, just recently someone questioned on that podcast when I said, hey, we had hotels hit by missiles 4 times. And some guy's like, that's impossible. Who the fuck else remembers that? And actually, it was more than that. It was 4 times we know of for sure while we were in those hotels. But for some reason, I shouldn't tell people this because now everyone's going to accuse me of lying. But for some reason, that really pissed me off. It pissed me off for a whole, I don't know, hour. And then, but you're right. Yeah, you've got to evolve beyond that. I mean, think about all the shit that's flying around now about, the titans of social media, the SEALs. I mean, we can only aspire. We're just grasshoppers at their feet when it comes to media propagation, right? So, a guy like Jock, and this is not a hit on Jocko. I mean, he's done very well. Good on him. But even a guy like him with his following also has a determined counter following of people who tear him apart, right?
Well, I mean, we've had on the team house, we had a former SEAL that was in that world, never worked with Jocko, that has had some pretty damning accusations towards him.
Oh yeah. No, this is not,
no, just general.
Jocko. I'm just saying, yeah. So but the attacks came from the guy's own community,
right.
And that is particularly concerning. I don't mind attacks coming from the GP, general public. I mean, that's part of the game. And of course, I'm always going to be attacked by a few Marines. And I discount them by saying they're not real Marines. But when you're getting attacked by a substantive part of your community, then that is probably a concern, right?
Yeah, that's happened to me too.
Even among SEALs who like doing they're like a group of piranha. Whenever one of them goes to bathe, they all converge on him. But
all right, so here's my theory on this as we're going to kind of start rambling down the road. But this
is a good one. I like this.
I was just talking about this the other day with some folks, and I really believe this honestly, is that in this strange world that we inhabited, and we don't anymore, and I think it's healthy. So what's the personality trait? And I know this, the CIA recruits a certain personality trait, and that's narcissistic sociopaths. And so on the one hand, it can be incredibly effective if you're running a surveillance detection route alone, carrying $200,000 in the back streets of Baghdad or Kandahar or Damascus, and you have to determine, are you surveillance free? You have an asset meeting. All these things where you have this incredible capacity to operate on your own. That makes you a really kind of shitty teammate later on. That has nothing to do with on how you can manage, and it promotes kind of a zero-sum mentality. And so that was always my issue at CIA. And so ultimately my success now in the media, and I don't call it success, by the way, I'm just out there talking. Trust me, I don't make any fucking money. Everybody pays very low.
We pay D. We pay D there on this podcast.
That's right. And but if there is no way that people get up in the morning, a lot of our former colleagues, and are happy for your success. I'm sorry, that's just not but it's because this weird, I think, personality trait and on how we recruit folks into the organization. And to me, that is just, I've never kind of figured out how to crack that nut. I think ultimately one of the things that we might want to do, and I'm not going to speak for the special operations world, is maybe we're actually recruiting the wrong people. Maybe maybe you don't need that kind of sociopathic narcissist, because ultimately it leads to that notion of like, hey, if you have success, that means I'm failing. It's a zero. So I don't know if you found that in your old world. I certainly.
Well, 100%. I mean, the story of the Mozart group became that. It was. As soon as we were dealing with our own, bad actor within the organization, of course, a lot of people want to jump on the bandwagon, or simply cut us dead. The people who've been fighting on that same bandwagon. And I agree with you 100%. A lot of those guys were former military, and it's made me think hard over the last few years about how we select people within the military. So I'm very, I know this is a whole different program, but I can only speak about my community, and I think, no, we don't do a great job ultimately, because we still get too many officers who are risk averse, who are bureaucrats, and are driven by very selfish motives, that comes down to careerism. And we see it even in the Marine Corps, even though we love pretending that we're exempt from that.
Right.
and I think egotism, narcissism are part of that. But I think, to me, certainly within the military, the biggest part, and I can't put my finger on it, is just kind of this bureaucratic mentality that people use time and time again to persuade them into doing nothing. That's on one side. And then on the other side, you've got the other extreme within the soft community of people who think that the rules don't apply to them.
Right.
They, hey, we are super talented. We pay a heavy price. To us, the rules don't quite apply the same way. In the words of the SEAL Master Chief, the boys just need to blow off steam. So, this mistaken feeling that, which has destroyed us in the soft, which hurt us in the soft community.
Right.
Because of all the bad publicity and that churns around it. So I do think about that a lot. And I think you're onto something. And I'm not sure what the answer is, except that we do need to, instead of patting ourselves on the back, we need to really look at the people that we have in these positions, especially as warfare evolves, right? And you need a far more cerebral guy. You need a guy who is just as tough, but he needs to be cerebral.
Right.
And in the Marine Corps, we have not done that. We have too many idiots among our officers. I know there are those on this show who will say all our officers are idiots. I would say no, for the most part, most of our officers are great, but we still have too many guys who do not belong in uniform. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, but I'm great. Yeah, absolutely. It matters to us because we spent all our adult lives in an institution,
right?
The agency, me, the Marine Corps. It's my family.
And it's your identity. I mean, it's exactly. I mean, 26 years of my life was,
and I take it personally when I see fucked up Marine Corps officers doing bad things. I don't mean just being incompetent, but I mean, just anyway, enough. Just not being Marines.
What kind of personality would fit besides like that type A narcissist, sociopath, go-getter?
Let me flip. Let me just tell you a story. This is a great story. So I have to sanitize this. So long time ago, I handled one of our top penetrations of a Middle Eastern country. It was an intelligence officer. He was in line to be within their leadership ranks. And one of the things, and I didn't I was not the recruiting officer, I was the handling officer. And so one of the things you do when you take over a case, Jason knows this, is you're gonna sit down with the asset, the asset, and you kind of have to go over the history of the case. But I wanted to get into his head, like, why did he end up, and he volunteered, and the mechanics of when he approached us. And he goes, well, look, he said, I was watching at every diplomatic reception how how U.S. diplomats were reacting. He goes, I could pick all of you guys out and gals out, and I was guilty of this too. He goes, you were the glad handler. You wanted to be the life of the party. We're gonna have Jason's gonna laugh. You're gonna be the one running like the scotch tasting at the military attaché circuit, or organizing the soccer games, or but you are the life of the party, kind of this domineering American. And he said, and then I looked in the corner of the room and I saw some guy. He showed up to every reception, but he didn't say a word. And so he goes, I said to myself, that not only is a CIA officer, not one, and by the way, everyone else in there is as well, but they're just kind of these type A American assholes. He said, but that guy's going to keep me alive. I want an introvert. I want someone who is you can't even tell. Nobody even knows him, knows his name. And so that's the person he ended up walking up to one day and said, I'm from so-and-so country. I'd like to talk to you privately. And I remember in the station bullpen, everyone's like, well, that motherfucker didn't do anything. The guy, it was a volunteer. And I was like, thinking about it later, I was like, actually, no, he did everything right. But he was an introvert. So you don't have to be this kind of type A asshole. And so, I've thought about that over the years. And so I would think that, kind of the used car salesman, maybe that's not the best model we have for an intelligence officer.
Yeah, the analogy that a mentor told me was the bumper sticker on the car said, if there's an accident, a crime, whatever it is, police are going to show up, they're going to ask questions, and someone's going to say, the thing I remember about that car that sped away is they had a bumper sticker on the back of their car. And he told me, if you go out in the parking lot, you look at my car, I have no bumper stickers because I want to be the gray man. I want to be the guy who people are like, I think it was a blue car, but there were no distinguishing marks. So I've always carried that with me, always be, I don't want to be the bumper sticker on the car. It's just like with people who I've had this conversation with people that are big 2A guys, which I'm fine. I'm a proponent of the Second Amendment, but they're always screaming. A lot of them are screaming about their guns being taken. And just like my mentor was telling me, you know, if you are so adamant that they're coming for your guns, why do you have all these gun stickers all over your cars? You're the first person that they're going to look for. So it kind of goes to what that asset was saying, you know.
I've always tried to picture what that's going to look like when they come for our guns.
Black helicopters.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the guys I shouldn't actually mention.
It's going to be your local sheriff that you know who's going to show up at your door. That's what it's going to be. But yeah, so it's pretty cool analogy. But yeah, and that's how I tried to, my short career at the agency, I tried to be that cliched gray man. Well, in my case, it'd be dark gray, but that gray man, you know, as much as possible.
I think that's great advice that you got. And I guess the answer probably is that, you know, why do we have to have this kind of personality test? You know, why are we recruiting narcissists, sociopaths as our intelligence officers? Maybe, and you know, maybe we should actually look at, because also I would argue that, and the agency is horrible leadership. We don't teach leadership. You know, you guys both know this. If you're in the military, you have a 20-year career, you've probably spent 1 or 2 one-year assignments at some kind of leadership school. The agency, we have 3 one-week classes in your 20 years. And so, and all the attributes that make you a great case officer, again, make you a terrible leader, because you have to make that switch from line officer to manager, where it's not about you anymore. It's about all the people under you, and people have a terrible time doing that.
When was that for you, when you took over at Coast? I mean, was
2003 was my first management job. I was chief of operations in Kuwait, and I sucked. I was fucking terrible. I'd come off a tour in Iraq where I received the Distinguished Intelligence Medal, the agency's second highest award. So I thought I was the baddest person on the planet. And all of a sudden, I'm managing a whole bunch of folks, thinking I'm still the baddest person in the world, not realizing it's all about them, not about me. And I look back at my decisions and how I acted, and it was abominable. And I got better.
But the point is, you're looking back and saying that, right? If they really were abominable, or you were a bad leader, you wouldn't be saying that. You wouldn't be looking back at all, right? Because those guys just don't self-reflect.
Look at a cable you wrote 20 years ago, if one can, and you know how much it's the use of the first person. It evaporates very, and because again, it's at the end of the, my last couple jobs. I mean, my last job when I was the ops chief over Europe and Eurasia, technically I had probably 1,000, 2,000 people working for me. But what did I want? I wanted everybody there smarter than me. I never would have said that, in 2003 in my first management job. But I wanted to be the dumbest person in the room. I'll be your leader. I have the experience to make decisions. I want to surround myself with greatness. That is so against the grain of a CIA case officer. It's completely not what you want at all, because you are kind of indoctrinated to be this badass.
And to work hard, right? We had this thing: if we're not working hard,
well, that's the whole
the going on, right?
Right. So I could talk for hours on this issue, because
we're not doing activity.
I literally went out. I remember one time to a station. I got in trouble for this, and I was wrong. I went out to a station as a manager. The station wasn't working hard enough, and I basically said, everyone can kind of make their reservations to go home. I want you guys out 7 nights a week. And at the end of your tour, I want you crawling up the stairs of the plane. I thought I was giving a rah-rah speech, and it was pretty stupid. Because especially in places where people are coming off of war zone tours or exhausted, you do have to have this work-life balance. I mean, the notion, even now, I have disagreements with former colleagues. At CIA as a case officer, you got to work at night. That's fine. Got it. But you know what you can do? You can go home for dinner, see your family. And you have to be able to take care of it. We need time in the gym. Everyone should be working out. I mean, so there's, I learned, a good buddy of mine was a former command sergeant major of, he'll get mad at me, of Delta, Rob Lively. I don't know if you guys know Rob. He's a great guy. And him and I have gone down to the Philly Police Department to teach some leadership stuff and especially some of the Philly SWAT units. And Rob has a thing, he calls it the combat leadership chassis. And I was like, and I stole it immediately. Just like you guys can poach my guests and I'll have you guys on my show. Like, you hear something good, but he goes, you get up in the morning, is everything working? Hydrate. This is basic. Hydration, nutrition, exercise. These are your controllables. No one taught me that at CIA. It was more of like, hey, how much did we fucking drink last night? And I got to go out again tonight. But it's sleep hygiene.
Yeah.
And so, when no one ever taught me that. I think that's really important. And so, I've kind of evolved in that as well. Last point is whatever it is, Gen Z, the new generation now, they are not going to tolerate bullshit from us as leaders. And so, what happens at CIA if someone, has a boss who's going to work them to death, doesn't allow them to take care of themselves, they're going to quit. And right when I left, CIA did a study of why people at the 5-year mark were quitting, and it was like 90% said because they had shitty first line managers. So
that's an indictment.
Yeah,
but I mean, that's feedback's a gift, right? That gives you,
yes.
if they're serious. That's the thing that bothers me sometimes about surveys. They're used to inflict discipline or impose discipline on individual commanders, but they're not necessarily used to fix systemic problems, which is what you're talking about.
I once had 360 feedback. They said Mark thinks he's a lot smarter than he really is, and I was horrified when I thought about that a lot. I was like, yeah, maybe that's true, and I kind of took that to heart. It was
right. That's the pious lie that we tell ourselves in order to.
Especially, but I think the biggest thing is humility. Like, you got to be humble as a leader, especially with kind of the stuff we were doing. So
let me ask you, Mark. So like that assignment in Kuwait, at what point in your career did you realize, oh shit, I don't think I was doing the right thing, or I wasn't a great leader there, or whatever? Like, was it early on, or was it like with benefit of hindsight and experience? Like,
probably a combination of things, but certainly looking back, mostly so this is a really important point. I was having a very hard time making the transition from one of the boys and gals in the back to leader. And so, so what does that mean? It means at the Marine House at midnight, go fucking home if you're a manager. Sorry, nothing happens at a Marine House after midnight that's good if you're supervising your officers. They can do whatever the hell they want, but it's things like that. You can't, and so I'm not their friend anymore. I'm just not. And so, and in a place like that, I was still too close to the officers, who then you end up having to possibly discipline. And so I think about, and that's a struggle that case officers have, or any managers probably have, in from having this intense, environment where you're right next to someone, to all of a sudden to then being their boss. Because guess what you want to do? You want to be liked.
Yeah, it's the American thing. You want to be a
leader. That's really not part of the whole fucking leadership equation. You can't give a shit about that, and so that that's the thing I really struggled on, and eventually you get better at it, and you get better because you screw things up.
You get better because you're paying attention, and you're willing to, and you're honest with yourself. Right. That's why we all know 4-stars and 3-star generals who've had all the experience in the world but are still shitty leaders, because they haven't reflected on that experience. It's all, they've used it all to bolster their image of themselves, which is positive.
The one thing, when I've gone and I wrote a book on leadership, when I've talked about it, and I try, of course, and so I remember it was actually pretty funny. I got it from a very senior former agency officer I really like. He sent me a text one time. He said, "Hey, can you teach me some leadership?" with a little smiley face. And I was like, but the point I'm making is that not that I was a great leader at all. It's just I'm just trying. These are just lessons on leadership that I found, mostly from me screwing up, and I made a ton of mistakes. And so it's I think that is where it's important to have that kind of mentality of understanding, being humble, and it's a really tough business. I mean, this is not, we're not worrying about, whether your sales of Coca-Cola went up and down. There's a lot of life and death stuff. And so, but I think the two biggest best traits for an intelligence officer to be humble, and then to be curious. So that's a Ted Lasso thing. Be curious. I think I like Ted Lasso.
All right, boys, this was great. Andy Milburn, Colonel Andy Milburn. His book is available. The link is in the description. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can check out his Substack. Everything will be in the description. All of Mark's links will also be in the description.
Can I say something real quick?
Absolutely.
Very quick about Substack. Hey guys, please check out and if you want to read it. But I wrote I wrote an article I'm just about to release actually about the worst year of my life, which was the lawsuit. Dee's familiar with the story, some of you. I'm not going to go into it now, but I fought 2 lawsuits in the last 2 years, one on both. On all counts, both dismissed. But it was expensive and it was incredibly painful. And if I hadn't had the backing of a major media organization, I would have been finished. I would have been done. And it's taught me how fragile the First Amendment is. But most of all, it's really talked about humility. It's brought me face to face with a type of fear that I never knew during active duty, never knew facing death. Fear of just losing everything, my family, everything that I built up. That's what I was facing last year. So, to me, the article is more interesting in that sense and scary and frightening than any of the stories I've told about combat, for what it's worth. And I'd love to get any feedback, positive feedback, of course. I don't listen.
I will read that. That's amazing. Wow.
But I'm a changed man, and after that year, and I like to think for the better. So
you're welcome, Andy.
This was not about me.
No, it's great. No, we touched on it slightly.
I want to take that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, we touched on it slightly on your last Team House episode, which was good. Yeah.
Mark, an alleged rapist who sadly was a Marine reservist brought a lawsuit against me for going after him in Ukraine. Going after him, by that I mean I was asked to put out a description of him. He claimed that I was trying to get the Mossad group to assassinate him, which is absurd. This was early days of the war, the Russians. And anyway, the lawsuit was a $20 million lawsuit, and it was a frightening year.
Oh, sure.
Very interesting things happening in that year, to include his lawyer having a total stroke and first day in court. There's weird acts of, I won't say acts of God, but things. I'm not going to go there, but weird things happening. Anyway, I'm alive, I'm emerged, and and I won, but I'm a vastly poorer, vastly wiser person than I was.
Well, hopefully adversity like that makes you stronger. I mean, that's
I'm not sure I'd do it all again.
No, agreed.
Also, right, Mark, the Red Sox stink, by the way.
What a win last night, 12-10. It was painful.
I see you have the schedule in the back, like get the whiteboard out.
Going to Baltimore on Monday, Sunday. I'm going to see Red Sox on. I think I might be up there over. There's a counterterrorism conference September 12th and 13th, and I think that the Red Sox are playing the Yankees. So
I'm through, bro. Let's grab dinner.
Yeah, got to do it. Got to go. We went to a Greek restaurant last time. No, we went to a Lebanese place. We got to go to your Greek restaurant.
No, so we went to a Greek restaurant last time, but it wasn't my family's. Right. But we can go to my family's one. Hopefully, it'll be fucking open. No, it'll be open. Yeah, we can go. It's Avli Greek Kitchen. If you're in Brooklyn, go check it out.
Yeah, it's right. Actually, the food there is awesome.
Oh, yeah, me and Andy went. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really good.
All right, boys. Patreon.com/the Team House. That's how you support the show. Don't forget to do that. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And thanks, guys.
Mark, great having you on. Thank you so much.
Anytime. You all were great. Thanks so much.